For those of you that have joined the alt-right, white nationalism, national socialist groups, you have been duped. You have been tricked by false promises and bad arguments. Let me take a moment to debunk them. And welcome back, everyone. I am here to debunk these arguments, but some words of wisdom from a woman who lived through fascism. Anyone who advocates for fascism and communism has no idea the tyranny that those things caused and the amount of devastation and destruction it brought upon the world. So the first thing I'd like to get into in debunking the alt-right, white nationalist, neo-Nazi, national socialist group, one of the arguments that they use to recruit people into the alt-right from usually particularly the conservative category, that much is true. From Punks for Progress. That is true. They do tend to target that kind of category. So, the first one I want to talk about is the genetic aspects, which the argument is something like, if you talk about genetic variance, or genetic diversity, they'll come out and they'll say that the white race has enough genetic variance in it that it won't cause inbreeding issues, like the example with the pit bull that is basically a genetic cesspool and a very low life expectancy because its genetic variance is very low due to large amounts of inbreeding to eventually get the pit bull. Now, that part is certainly true, but what is not being explored in that argument and what people are falling for, they're not thinking about it in full aspects. And I mean, honestly, I've covered a lot of social justice warrior arguments throughout this channel because the social justice warrior alt-left arguments are really shitty. And to be honest, they're kind of easy to debunk. But when it comes to the alt-right, I do have to give them credit. They are a little bit more organized and methodical, and they use aspects from science but still engage in neo-Lysenkoism. But the aspects that they do use from science to try to convince people to move over to their side are much more convincing than any social justice warrior rhetoric I've ever heard of. Most of the social justice warrior shit is basically hyperbolic. I mean, that's so easy to debunk. I mean, you could do it in your sleep. But when somebody makes an argument that says, well, the white race, there's enough people of the white race that genetic variance wouldn't be an issue. Okay, a little part of that is true. But here's an aspect that isn't being brought up is you're talking about stagnation of genetic variance and genetic diversity instead of excelling it and perpetuating it forward. Now, I would like to show different things, like white people have particular ailments and sicknesses or genetic disorders the white people the majority of people who get it are white, and the same thing goes with all the other races. Is that there's particular health concerns that happen to be more plentiful in their genetic aspects rather than other genetic aspects from particular genomes. But I haven't gone through and researched all of that. Like, I know diabetes. I think there's certain types of like diabetes. There's certain types of cancers where some races are, like, we're talking about a genetic genome here, not necessarily a race, but a genome, is more likely to get this thing than the other sect of genomes. And so essentially by, like, let's just use diabetes, for example. Let's say that white people are more prone to diabetes than black people. So by combining our genetics, eventually you're going to end up with offsprings where diabetes is no longer a genetic issue. This is increasing genetic variance and genetic diversity. When you look into the face and the eyes of those who are mixed or biracial, you are looking into the face of future generations to come. This isn't about you. The white race isn't under attack. The black race isn't under attack. No race is under attack because human beings are one species. This is about survival, and you can't stop nature. Nature is the only dictator we have no control over. You just can't win against it. And that's just the fact of the matter. And so it's not about white race, saving the white race, saving the black race, saving the Asian. There's a few races from Asia, like a few, but it's not about that. It's about the perpetuation of the human species as a whole. I don't know why you would ignore that, and I don't know why you would insist on stagnating genetic variance and genetic diversity. The other aspect of this is many people who think in these lines is like, if you're talking about any racial identity, then you are an identitarian. I am not an identitarian. I am not fixated on race. If everybody becomes like a light brown color in the future with blue eyes or hazel eyes, that's not disappointing to me. That's the future. It doesn't matter. I'm not married to my race. It's not like a big fucking deal. It's fine. So that's one aspect of the argument, is they try to argue genetics. But unfortunately, with things like the Human Genome Project and scientists all over the world studying genetics and where we are at in genetic research, it would be very, very difficult to find a scientist in that field that will agree with that any race is a master race. There is no such thing as a master race. That doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There is no such thing as a master race. If anything, biracial mixed race people are closer to being a master race than anybody that's solitarily one race. So you are talking about stagnating genetic variance. The second thing that I'd like to get into is nostalgia. So, believe it or not, nostalgia is, and actually very effectively is, a key talking point and a key argument that the alt-right uses to try and recruit people onto their side. And there's a real big problem with nostalgia. When we look back in remembrance, we always remember the good, but we usually fail to remember the bad. And there are things, and I'm going to use Tramp Stamp's video, because he made this clown world. I think it's a, means of trolling, because 4chan started saying clowns Nazis, then mainstream media thought that was real, and now the real Nazis are proclaiming it as theirs, so that the mainstream media says, well, now you can't use clowns anymore because that means you're a Nazi or something like that, which is just dog shit. So I'm going to use Tramp Stamp's video as an example. He has a video, and I'll play the clip now. So, nothing personal to Tramp Stamp, but this video is depictions of, it's not even 1950s, it might be 1950s through 1970s, of look at the all-American dream. And like I said, nothing personal against you, Tramp Stamp. I'm only using this as an example of, this is one of the arguments that the alt-right will try to use, is nostalgia. But the problem with nostalgia is it promises and never delivers. And the thing is that we look at all the great times, but we seem to remember all the horrible things about it. So we move forward in this video to the future, and it's like a club scene, and you see white people, white women grinding on black guys' crotches. This is a normal bar scene, and they're not showing the white dudes that are having their crotches being grinded up against, because this is what people do in bars nowadays. It's fine. Alright. So, there's a few problems with this. First of all, in the 1950s, egalitarianism, humanitarianism, no. That wasn't a thing back then. The only way you actually had a decent life back in the 1950s is if you were a heterosexual white male. Now, if you are a heterosexual white male, that may sound really good to you, but you also have examples of white people dating black people back then that got a lot of flack from both the black community and the white community because of the whole separate but equal thing. Hey, leftists, your whole separate but equal thing was done before. It's called the 1950s. It didn't work. Can we stop segregating people and fucking college campuses? That's been done. It's been tried. Go read about Rosa Parks. Go read about 1950s separate but equal, and stop segregating people based on race. That is a stupid and ridiculous fucking thing to do. I'm sorry, I had to mention that because I just want to be very clear. I'm not in favor of the alt-right or the alt-left. I'm not in favor of either one of these things. I'm not an identitarian. I'm not fixated on race. It's something that I feel that in today's day and age, we should be above and beyond. But back to nostalgia. So let's talk about 1950s. Women's rights? Women didn't have much rights back in the 1950s. And then you have the 1950s conformity, where we talk about that white American middle-class family. And then we have this. So there is a list of pros in here, and I'm not going to go over those. There's only 6, by the way, and, well, I'll just go ahead and go over them. The link to this will be in the description below. Smooth function, dissemination of workload, safety net, protection, harmony, rule enforcement, and here's the cons. Conformists do not change the world. Lack of diversity. Lawbreakers. Conformity manifests apathy. Conformity can breed people that are not thinkers. Conformity can cause an unjust world, and anarchy. Oops. So there were some cons to conformity. You know what else conformity leads to? There's this interesting pop singer. She's actually kind of dark, and I kind of like some of her lyrics, some of her songs, I should say. But she talks about how conformity is just basically people who are fake plastic bitches. If you're into conformity in the 1950s Victorian puritanical shit, you're probably a fake plastic bitch. So, I'll play a clip from one of her songs now.
Hey girl, look at my mom, she's got it going on. Ha, you're blinded by her jewelry. When you turn your back, she pulls out a flask and forgets his infidelity.
So I will leave like a selection of songs that depict what conformity does to people, because it does inspire rebellion. And it's ultimately the 1950s conformity that brought about the 60s with the hippie movement. So if you have conformity, you can expect to see insurgency or rebellion. And the only way you can silence that is with excessive force. So, on with the 1950s. I found this interesting clip about homosexuality from the 1950s, where it says homosexuality wasn't even made legal, officially legal in the United States till 1996. Yeah, little gay people, SJWs out there, you think you're oppressed today? You're not. You're not oppressed anymore. Stop it. Because every time somebody calls you a faggot and you go, oh, my hurt feelings, you create another person that goes and joins the fucking alt-right. Stop letting words have power over you. They do not deserve that level of power to be able to be uttered and completely destroy your mental and emotional stability. Do not give a word that kind of power. Don't. You know, that's a person that's biased, prejudiced, bigoted towards you, but ultimately, that's not oppression. Oppression is when you're denied your rights, liberties, and freedoms as an individual because you're a homosexual. That's oppression. And I'm sorry, but an individual that refuses to interact with you because it like denies you a cake, to me that's not oppression, that's just a bigoted individual. And I think really the way that if you want to stop, like social justice is not the answer to this shit. If you want my answer to this shit, instead of social justice, what we should be doing is looking at the racial identitarians, like people who are racist from both any end of the spectrum. It doesn't even matter if they're Asian and they're racist towards white people, if they're white people and they're racist towards just anything like that. We should treat them like they're the abnormal ones. Just everybody that has a normal mindset, just treat homosexuality, biracial couples, and people of different ethnicities as normal. Just treat them as normal, like you would anyone else. Just joke around and fuck around, whatever. It doesn't matter. The people who are racialized, who wear racialized lenses, the people who discriminate against homosexuals, you should look at them like they're the weird ones. There's something wrong with them. We used to hate people. Now we just make fun of them. It's more effective that way. That's a quote from KMFDM's Dogma. And for any alt-left person that might be watching this out there, I have this quote from KMFDM for you. Radical anarchists, fascists, and terrorists are responsible for the violence. Swallow that pill. That came out in the 80s, by the way. Late 80s, early 90s, something like that. So civil rights have won, and now because of the screeching SJWs, the alt-right have ammunition to recruit people. So I also wondered about the 1950s because it's painted up in this glamorous, picturesque quality. But then I found this.
Infidelity was also widespread in former decades and in historical and tribal societies. Reports in the 1920s indicated that 28% of American men and 24% of women were adulterous at some point after wedding. This was cited by Lawrence from 1989. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, approximately 33% of men and 26% of women in American samples were adulterous. By Kinsey, and this was published in 1953. Data in the 1970s indicated that some 41% of men and 25% of women reported infidelity. And data collected in the 1980s suggests that 72% of men and 54% of women were unfaithful at some point during marriage.
So it would seem that adultery had a higher percentage back in the 1950s than it does today. And I think that's because of sexual liberations, like the hippies did, is free love, is that's not considered to be adulterous. And actually, studies have shown, psychological studies have shown, that people who are more promiscuous when they're younger tend to settle down when they're older and are less likely to have a divorce. Imagine that. Young people don't know what they want. And as you get older and you get exposed to more personalities, that starts to become more refined, and you get a better idea of what it is that you want in a partner you want to spend the rest of your life with. You get your shit together, your priorities straight, and you're more likely to find someone. Some people prefer to be alone. Promiscuity is no longer looked down upon, and sodomy was officially legalized across the board only, I think, in 2007 here in the United States. So, I also want to do kind of this montage that, you know, the sheets still stain when they're warm. Children are still depressed when you dress them up. And syrup is still syrup, even when it's in a sippy cup.
Blood still stains when the sheets are washed. Sex don't sleep when the lights are off. Kids are still depressed when you dress them up. And syrup is still syrup in a sippy cup.
Alright. Some other songs that I will leave in the description below will include the two Melanie Martinez songs, but as well as a goth band called Flesh for Lulu, a song called Decline and Fall, a post-punk goth band called the Chameleons, a song called Nostalgia, and a Riot Girl band called Jack Off Jill, and a song called Nazi Halo. I personally would love to play the Nazi Halo song in homage to Riley Dennis or other SJWs like him, because I kind of see the neo-Nazi logic, even though it's more well-professed and more methodical than SJW, they're still kind of on the same kind of domain. Alt-left and alt-right literally are becoming mirror images to me. It's just that the alt-right are more methodical about it. It seems like they're more intelligent about how they're enacting this. It's like they want a civil war, so they're playing into the alt-left because the alt-left is trying to put out fire with gasoline. And then you have people like me that are saying, no, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it. This is how you be a rebel. Being a rebel should mean that you don't give a fuck. Now, all you alt-righters out there, I know I've trashed the 1950s, and don't get me wrong, there are things that happened in the 50s that were going correctly. However, gay conversion therapy, they used electroshock therapy, which was be inhumane or really unethical today. So, there were some good things, though, back in the 1950s. You did have a slightly lower crime rate, although crime rates were not always statistically accurate from that time period because a lot of cities were mafia-owned and operated. So it's hard to tell the real crime statistics from the 1950s when you had entire cities being ran and owned and operated by mafias. White people, killing other white people. So, some more trash, though, about the 1950s conformity. It was a time where we had some wartime issues. We had a lot of that, a lot of rebellion, a lot of people being criminalized. So these are things that we don't talk about when we talk about the 1950s, but we keep complaining about the modern age, and the modern age is not that bad. Communication is at a height that we've never seen before. I am able to conduct this video and reach people from all across the world that can respond to me almost instantaneously. With things like Google Translate, communication barriers are almost no longer a thing. We've upgraded our equipment, like nobody from the 1950s, if you went back in time and told them that you'd be able to have a telephone that you could carry in your pocket that could reach out to the internet and you could communicate audio and visually with people with a touch screen all over the world from from a fucking phone. You would have to explain what the internet was to them, because that would be completely beyond their fucking imagination. Seriously, our medical science has advanced well beyond what they had back in the 1950s. The type of labor work that we do today is nowhere near compared to the labor that we do today. It's become more repetitive. But, I mean, there's no more back-breaking farm labor because we've advanced in technology in farm work as well. So, I don't know why everybody thinks that today's modern age is bad. Oh, that's right, crony capitalism. But I'm going to throw you a bone, alt-right, to people who subscribe to the alt-right, is that before the internet happened, most of the alt-right, the KKK, neo-Nazi organizations, they would get funding and money through fundraisers out on the streets, and they would stand on their soapbox and have little get-togethers and speak, and it was a public spectacle. People could see that if they wanted to. Most people don't want to, though. Most people were just like, hey, look at the neo-Nazi shits. You're not a very popular group, just to let you know if you didn't know that. And then, enter in the internet. And, this is something that really pisses me off about Trump and just mainstream media, is that they totally killed the aspect of being independently employed, self-employed, because you could do that on YouTube through education and whatnot, through ad monetization, which Trump let Ajit Pai take net neutrality away. Trump has been ignoring the internet, not implementing basically a Bill of Rights like we have as citizens. It's just not applicable on virtual space for some reason. Not sure why. Nobody can figure that one out. And CNN saying, oh my God, there's Nazis making money off of ad revenue. Okay, so if we look at the entirety that is on the internet that is making money off of ad revenue, back when ad revenue was a thing, maybe like 1% was Nazis making ad revenue money. And then you had the 99% were not Nazis making money off of ad revenue. So thanks, corporate media, for totally fucking us over on a way out of corporatization. Everybody has a problem with crony capitalism. That's the problem on the table that rational people are trying to talk about to find a resolve to. Because corporatism and crony capitalism has been running amok. And it is a severe problem, especially here in the United States. It's like we've given corporations too much fucking goddamn power, and they're running amok. So, yeah, that is a problem. And rational people of the left and the right, rational people, not all left and alt-right, but the rational left and right, are talking about what we can do to combat that. Now, usually the right's response is completely free market capitalism. Like capitalism with no restrictions. And my response is, well, we need some restrictions to hold these corporations that do illegal things where there's real victims involved. Not just one or two victims, but a massive amount of victims. We need to hold them accountable. And I'll save that speech for a later time. So, I just wanted to clarify that I think that the soapbox, the arena has changed. So instead of doing fundraisers out on the streets, we've moved over to the internet. And so no, I don't want to keep pushing the alt-right underground. I think that they absolutely have the right to speak their mind, but it should be out in the open where people like me can come forward and say no. Saying that you want a white ethnostate and isolating a genome is a bad idea. They can receive that criticism and receive further criticism saying, well, yeah, there is a genetic variance within the white race, but you would still be halting genetic diversity and variance by doing that. Or bringing up nostalgia and saying, don't fall for the nostalgia claim, because the nostalgia claim promises and never delivers. And see, that's called public discourse. I don't have to be a dick. I can be, but I don't have to be. I can be polite and civil and say, no, that's a terrible idea. So these are just some of the arguments that I've come across. I'd been searching for more, but wouldn't you know it, finding Nazis and asking them, you know, I don't think a white ethno-state will work, change my mind, is a lot harder to do than you think, because people with that mindset have been pushed so far underneath the carpet, like so far underground, they're hard to find. They're hiding. You don't know who they are. You don't hear their voice anymore. They have essentially been silenced. And that's dangerous, because now you don't know where they are, who they are, what they're saying, who they're recruiting. And so skeptics can't come forward and tackle their arguments. There is no debate. It's all like grabbing individual people, taking them into their lair, brainwashing them, and oops, another Nazi. And this is dangerous, and I think that it's something that should be out in the open where we can publicly talk about these things, like grown adults, instead of being reactionary herd mentality people and just shoveling it all underneath something and trying to forget that it even existed. Because the unfortunate reality is that it does. We used to hate people. Now we just make fun of them. It's more effective that way. Radical anarchists, fascists, and terrorists are responsible for the violence. Words of wisdom, my friends. Words of wisdom. So I'll leave you with your thoughts. And I wanted to put a lot more into this video, but I was cut short on time. So, Tramp Stamp, don't take it personal. I was just using your video as an example. You know, I'm totally cool with talking to people of the alt-left and the alt-right as long as you can be civil with me. That's all I ask. And if you're not civil with me, I won't be civil back. I'm all up for discussing these things. It's fine, but understand my stance. I am not into identity politics. You will not ever see me put any race on a pedestal because I am an egalitarian and a humanitarian. I am an independent liberal. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I am an independent liberal. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. I will have links in the description. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Hit the bell button on any channel you're subscribed to. And before I conclude, I do want to say, if you still think that the alt-left and alt-right don't have a lot in common, or that, you know, these are harmless ideologies, well, I think this is a good segue into another topic that somebody wants me to cover, which would be the awesome Polish kid. I can segue this into how Poland got split because of Hitler's fascism and Stalin's communism. So with that, I'm out.
Blood money, how do you afford this ring that I love, honey? Just another shift at the drug company. He doesn't think I'm that fucking dumb, does he? It doesn't matter.